couple of other things I wanted to say before we jump into our lesson. Number one, this lesson is directly connected, at least in my mind, hopefully you'll see the connections, with what Adam said last week. I'm going to tell you that lesson hung with me all week long. I must have listened to it 3 times. I'm going to encourage you to go back, pull up from our website that lesson and look at the video. Listen to Adam's words. These are things that we need to be thinking about. This is an incredible challenge as he talks about the passage in Luke, and we're going to reference that in just a minute. So I want to encourage you to do that. That's a wonderful resource, but last week's lesson was beyond outstanding in my mind. And I wanted to tag onto that and just add a little bit that might contribute to that effort. But I did want to tell you this, make it very clear. I don't do accents. Now, if that doesn't make any sense to you, go back and listen to the lesson. The third thing is I wanted to apologize to Brother Dingy. I'll get your name right one day. You're not the former coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Okay. That I'm actually going to trample on a little bit of his class that he's doing on Wednesday night, the last, that is, I think it's in 2 weeks, that he was going to touch on the book of Philemon, and I'm going to brush up against it just a little bit. But to be honest, the book of Philemon is such a little piece of real estate. I wanted to say I'm aware that, to him before services, that I hope I don't mess up his flow of what he wants to talk about and think about in that regard. Having said all that, let's jump in. All right, this is where we were last week. There are a few passages in the New Testament that are harder than this statement by Jesus. We're going to look at maybe another one that would be comparable, but very few of them would challenge in the same way. As Jesus says, this huge crowd that's following him, and he turns and says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, and wife, and children, and brother, and sister, and yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. These are some of the most direct and powerful statements that Jesus makes in this whole ministry. And people for the last 2,000 years have come to this place and it's like running into a brick wall. The power of and necessity of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus is the context in which Adam was talking last week about making this choice and understanding what that means. And I won't try to retell that excellent lesson. But the fact is, this is hard. It is a direct challenge to the way we think, the way we live, the value systems that we have, that we must put Jesus first of all things. Let me show you a similar passage from John 6. Jesus was not there to politic, or to change his message in ways that would make it easier. Now, understand that the context of this passage here in John 6 is the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus has fed this vast crowd, and when they wanted to force him into confronting the leadership, probably both of the Romans and of the Jewish leadership, to make him king, he fled. They found him. 5,000 people wanting to declare him king, and when he begins talking to him, he says, let me tell you what this really is about and what it means. And what it means to follow me if you're going to declare me king. And one of the toughest statements of that is, so Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. Now, to the people that were hearing this, what a startling statement to us that understands the context and understands what would come later and in what we just did in partaking of the Lord's Supper and all of the things that are a part of that. It gives us connection and power and hope. But do you understand that Jesus, when he says this, is willing, in fact, the result of this, of statements like this, as he goes through this whole dialogue, and you see as we get to toward the end of this one chapter is 69 verses long, or actually more than that. And the result is that 5,000 member crowd has left. In fact, when you look at the context of this, and since this is kind of small type, I'm going to read it here. As a result of this, many of his disciples withdrew and were not walking with him anymore. Jesus said to the 12, you do not want to go away also, do you? It may have been that the disciples were maybe huddled in the corner or off to the side going, maybe now's the time to cut our losses. And no, Peter speaks up. Simon Peter answered him, said, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. We went from 5,000 the day before to 12 because of statements like, you're going to have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. That Jesus would ask hard things of us. Now, to us, that statement is not hard. We just did it. In the sense that we partook of the Lord's Supper. This is not the verse that challenges us. What I'd like to do is point out 3 ideas in a minute that might challenge us. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about this concept. Because I believe this is directly related to what Adam was talking about and these verses. The idea from Hebrews 10. Now, this is the passage that deals with, let us draw near, let us hold fast, and let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking the assembling of the saints. That whole section. This is that section right there. And he says now, do not neglect these things. And the verse just above this talks about, this is the Hebrews 12 passage. I got it mixed up. Sorry about that. Back all that up. Hebrews 12. Think about laying aside every encumbrance. We're going to come to that Hebrews 10 passage in a minute. But laying aside every encumbrance, what does that mean? We're running this race with endurance. How do you see that? Most of the time when we think about this verse, I think about those wonderful people that run marathons or that do the Ironman competitions or things like that. I get tired just watching them on TV. No, thank you. But I'm going to tell you, they're not carrying much on that run. They understand this concept. Let me show it to you in a little different light. The word I'd like to give you is refugee. I am a history nerd. I love when I've got elements on my phone that ping me about a historical event from whatever day it was. And one of the most moving that I have been following for the last year has been dealing with the organization that maintains the Auschwitz Memorial, the Holocaust Memorial in Poland. Every day, they post a picture of someone and tell the story, give the name and tell the story of someone who died or was barely escaped with their life from that horrible, unimaginable place. But some of the other things that they do is they post the pictures, the shoes, the glasses, the luggage that the people carried after they had been, their business had been taken, their homes had been taken, and they'd been rounded up and put on trains and taken to this place. The same thing applies to almost any refugee. Whether it's an earthquake or a storm or political unrest, the war in the Ukraine, it doesn't matter. This is almost a constant universal human experience for many nations and many places that the circumstances drive people away from their home. And what do? They grab things. They grab things that are precious to them. They grab things that are important to them. They grab things that are valuable to them. And they begin to carry them for a mile, 2 miles, 4 miles. Then pretty soon things begin, well, I really don't need that garden gnome that my mother gave me. Maybe I can leave that here and somebody can appreciate it as they walk by. Or maybe I don't need both sets of frying pans left to the side of the road. And the further they go, the more things become scattered on the side of the road. Why? I'm going to tell you why. They're running for their life. And what they are carrying around is holding them back. Pretty soon, the things that they considered valuable, precious, irreplaceable, end up on the side of the road. Isn't that the context of what Jesus was telling us in that Luke passage that Adam discussed with us? What are you willing to set aside? What are you willing to leave there on the side of the road if we're going to live? What would you take? What would you leave? This is the value question that Jesus was asking of us. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that if we look at this from the context of our material lives, we've heard that lesson, haven't we? What would you give up? I think the easy things was, well, I'd give up my car. Give up my, this is, by the way, this is where I was really tempted to try to do Adam's accent, right? Okay, no. He covered this. But let's talk about the things that are really hard. Because for the most part, they're not material things. They're things that we value about who we are and what I have. Let me give you an example of this. Two of the most challenging passages, and we're going to look at just small segments of both. 1 Corinthians 8, Romans 14. Highly discussed, debated passages. Not trying to get into that controversy or some of the nuances of that, but listen. The heart of that is that there are things that you have a right to. A right. Isn't that a powerful word? A right. We have rights. And these two passages said, if it is at the expense of a brother, you should take and give up that right. Look at this passage. But food will not commend us to God. We are neither the worse if we do not eat, nor better than if we do eat. But, here's the condition. Take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. I'm not asking you to leave your car keys at the front of in the back of the foyer there. But what you may need to do is something much tougher. Are you willing to give up a right, a privilege, a habit, so that another brother can worship with us? That you would lay on the altar of our service to God something that you could be taking advantage of, but there is something more important than that. We as Americans are terribly conscious and value our rights. This word here is liberty. Willing to give it up? In this particular case, it was, you eat what you want. Let me tell you, I was really tempted to put on this slide, smoke pit. What, no one eats at smoke pit? I'm going to make an inflammatory statement right here, and somebody's going to come after me, I know. Best barbecue in town. Now, if you disagree with that, you come talk to me. I want the address. Because I'm going to try it. But I've tried Gary's, and I've tried R&R, and I've tried a whole bunch of them because that's one of my favorite things in the world, you can tell. But if that offended someone here, if that caused them to step one small step away from Christ for some reason, give it up. I'll be glad to give it up for you. Now that's hard. That's a whole lot harder than giving up your color TV. To give up a right. Romans 14 is very similar. Go through this. Therefore, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather determine this, not to put an obstacle or a stumbling block in a brother's way. I know and am convinced in the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean in itself, but to him who thinks anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. I want you to think about a Pharisee, a former Pharisee, saying these words. And we're going to bring Paul along the smoke pit. Wouldn't that be interesting? But he says, it's not. But he says this, for because of food your brother is hurt, you are no longer walking according to love. Do not destroy with your food him for whom Christ died. Are you willing to give up a right? That's an intangible. But for the benefit of walking according to that wonderful statement, the challenge that Jesus gives us about loving, you're going to hate mother, father, brother, sister, even your own life. Yeah, I'm willing to leave it there. How about justice? Are you willing to leave justice aside? This is where I'm going to step on Mark's territory just for a moment. Because the story of Philemon, in many ways, is a story of 1 Corinthians 8 and Romans 14 put into action. Because Philemon's been hurt. He has been wronged. He has maybe even been robbed by his former slave, Onesimus. Can you imagine the anger, the embarrassment he must have felt? Because If you read this letter, it seems like the church meets in his home. And everybody must have known of his slave Onesimus, who all of a sudden may have taken things from him and fled. But Onesimus meets Paul, becomes a believer, and Paul sends him back. And he says this to Philemon: I appeal to you for my child Onesimus, whom I have begotten in my imprisonment, who formerly was useless to you, but now is useful both to you and to me. I have sent him back to you in person, that is, sending my very heart, whom I wish to keep with me so that on your behalf he might minister to me in my imprisonment for the gospel. But without your consent, I did not want to do anything, so that your goodness would not be in effect by compulsion, but of your own free will. Have you been wronged? Have you been robbed? Have you been defrauded? Has anybody in here recently renewed their vehicle warranty? Boy, there's some people that are sure concerned about mine. I laugh at those things, but yet Janelle and I know of a friend that actually fell for the prince, the African prince scam thing that went on. Yeah. To the tune of $80,000. Not only that, but he convinced some friends that this was such a wonderful opportunity that they put a mortgage on their house and they lost $250,000 and ultimately lost their home. Have you been defrauded for the tune of $250,000? No, I haven't. But I've had people that hurt me. I've had people that treated me in ways that took advantage of me. And it hurts. Makes me angry. It's not right that they do that and get away with it. And I'm going to. Do you know that one of the things that we are charged with is letting go? We're going to leave this on the side of the road. Even Philemon, who has been embarrassed and robbed and hurt, and Paul sends back this man and says, you're going to treat him like a brother, aren't you? That's gut check time. Have you been robbed? That's a whole lot harder than leaving your golf clubs on the side of the road, isn't it? How about a third example? Giving up dignity. Can you give up dignity for Christ? You know, that comes up quite a bit. See, I told you there was a Hebrews passage in here, didn't I? But remember this former days when, after being enlightened and you endured great conflict of suffering, partly by being made a public spectacle through reproaches and tribulations, and partly by becoming sharers with those who were so treated. This is the passage after draw near, hold fast, consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. And the passage just above this is, for our God is a consuming fire. Or is it falling into the hands of the living God? I think it's that one. But do you understand what they've endured? I learned something as a father. I'm going to share with you maybe one of my most important parenting tips. Dads, if you have a teenage girl, don't embarrass them. You will regret it. I thought it was funny. Not to them. But think about the things that these people may have endured as they have been excluded from their communities and lost family. That they have been made, as he says here, a public spectacle. The dignity and whatever this might have been, to say nothing of giving their lives later on the cause of Christ. Are you willing to leave your dignity at the door, on the side of the road, if it is to serve the cause of Christ? A little harder than those really cool sneakers. From 1 Peter. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. Just a few verses down. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but to glorify God in his name. I think if there is one of these that we are about to face in our communities and in our culture, this may be it. Are you willing to stand up and say, I'm not going to participate in that because I'm a follower of Christ? And then endure the humiliation that they will try to heap upon us. Are we willing to do that? Are we willing to leave our dignity there in the ditch because we are running for our lives towards Christ? What embarrasses you? What hurts your feelings? What right are you willing to give up? It is not about material things. Those can be replaced. Visa even guarantees that they'll fix that. No. The hard challenges, at least for some of us, the things that dwell within ourselves, our pride, our sense of rights, our sense of justice, and our dignity. Are we willing to sacrifice those, put those on the altar, and give them up? A little different thought. One more thought about my thread that I follow on a regular basis. On those that lost their lives at Auschwitz. Like I said, I'm a history nerd. I knew the numbers, knew the statistics, knew all of that. But it is the pictures that always get me. It is the pictures of these dignified ladies that were taken years or months before they were put on those trains. And the caption often reads, "They perished in the gas chamber." Handsome men, strong men, and they perished in the gas chamber, or they were shot on this date. But the ones that have gotten me lately have been the children. Because they'll often say, and he died with his mother in the gas chamber. And my brain goes, I don't get it. How? Why? And the answer to the question is, this is the sinful world at work. And I don't know what tomorrow will bring and when that horrible set of behaviors and circumstances will arise again, but I don't doubt for the first moment that it will. Someplace else, under a different name. I don't want my life tied here. Because Jesus has promised me, if I will lay all those things aside that I value and take up the things that He values and the cause that He has in spreading the gospel and protecting the believers and doing what I can to make this message known, the world He has promised me has no Auschwitz. It has no cemetery. It has no hospital or hospice or jail. And if that means for me to participate in that, I give up my rights, I give up my sense of justice, and I give up my dignity, then so be it. Let me do that. Because Jesus has paved a different path for His people. The path of hope. It is a high price. But it's worth it. Jesus, in one of the last statements He makes to His disciples, says, I go to prepare a place for you. Do you know, He in essence was talking to us. Do you want to be a part of that? That's the road that He wants us to take. And it is littered with the baggage left behind. How can we help you find that path? If you'd like to become a child of God or you need encouragement or teaching in some way that we can help you, why don't you let us know by coming up front while we stand and sing this invitation song.